All right, today we're going to be learning about segregation in America. Today we're also going to be using Turningpoint, which will allow us to use our clickers to actually be interactive today with the lesson. So let's get started. As you can remember, Reconstruction was what is going on during this time. We're right after the Civil War. We're basically trying to rebuild a broken nation. During this time, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are established, which help create freedom for the black community. All right, so here we're going to have our first thing. I want you to take your clickers, and I want you to pick the two most important things off this list that you see. And I'll wait for you guys to get done before I move on. All right, I see one response in. Rest of the class. There's two. There's three. All right, let's check the results real quick, see what you guys think. Oh, and we're perfectly even across the board, except for the 15th Amendment. Nobody likes the 15th Amendment today. All right, so we're actually going to talk a little bit about the 15th Amendment, and maybe we'll change your mind here. So, as you can see here, the 15th Amendment helped free the slaves, and it gave them the right to vote because they became citizens throughout this time period. As you can see up on the screen, there's poll tax and grandfather clause, which was essentially acts that were put in place to help keep blacks down at the voting polls. Grandfather clause basically said that if you were a white man and your grandfather or your father had voted, then the restrictions that applied to blacks didn't apply to you even if you couldn't read, so there's that. So, as you see there at the bottom, it effectively allows whites to bypass these restrictions. Right here we see some pictures of protests for the voting polls. And then here are some, we're going to be introduced to Jim Crow law. Jim Crow laws were essentially de facto laws, which means they weren't actually like constitutional laws, but they were laws enacted by the people because they were used over and over again. They were said racial discrimination laws used primarily in the South. And Jim Crow laws effectively established the separate but equal doctrine. And then here we have a poem from a minstrel show that kind of talks about how the term Jim Crow came around. So, what do you think were some of the areas of life affected by the Jim Crow laws? We have one response in. There's two. We're just waiting on that third one. Oh, there we go. See, I know when you guys aren't doing your things because I can put the counter up on the screen, so I know when everybody's done. And we're exactly even again. All right. However, the correct answer is E. So. Oh, I'm going backwards on you guys. All right. So here we're going to talk a little bit about separate but equal. We see Plessy versus Ferguson. Homer Plessy was a black man who rode in a white-only train car and essentially started a Supreme Court case that would challenge the separate but equal doctrine. This case would eventually be shot down, but later would be revoked by Brown versus the Board of Education. Here we see some examples of separate but equal. On the right, you have the classic water fountains, the colored only and the white only water fountains. And then on the left, this is an example of a black schoolhouse in Louisiana. As you can see, it's not, it's separate, but it's definitely not equal. So, and what I was talking about earlier, de facto law versus de jure law. De jure law is actual written law, whereas de facto law is kind of culturally enforced. in addition to black segregation, we also see immigrant discrimination and segregation, especially in the West with the Chinese and the Mexicans and Indians being forced onto reservations and such. Okay, so true or false, blacks were the only people who were discriminated against during this time period. And we have our counter down there at the bottom again too, so I'll know if you did answer. All right, looks like we have everybody in. And we all got that one right. Very good job, class, very good job. So here we have a picture of some discrimination against especially Chinese immigrants in the West, mainly in California. And the Chinese Immigration Act in 1882 effectively made it illegal for Chinese immigrants to come to the United States. This will have bigger implications for the global market, especially with later relations between China and the US, especially during the communist takeovers in the 1940s and 50s. So, which immigrant group do we usually not think of as being discriminated against during this time? All right, let's see what we got here. All right, so we have one vote for Russian, one vote for Mexican, and one vote for Canadian. And Irish and Chinese were the right answers. So apparently we're going to have to go back and do some relearning, and then I'll reassess you guys later after this one, because apparently we struggled a little bit with this. So that's all right though, we're learning. And then here we have two pictures that really represent the discrimination that we see between the Chinese on the left and the Irish on the right. As you see on the right, we have a scale here showing the Irish and blacks being compared equally. They were equally discriminated against in the East. And then on the West, we have a Great Wall to keep out the Chinese, which is a play on the Great Wall of China. And to finish, we're going to do an exit ticket, and I'm going to have you write why was the Chinese Exclusion Act so important for the future of the United States.